So our main goal was to demonstrate how harvesting methods for oysters have changed over time and how those technological changes have impacted the reefs and the population, and what that means for the broader Chesapeake Bay system.
The parents don't know the opportunities that's available, but they are. You just have to look for it. And like I said, I didn't have a lot, and I wish I did. So when I became a parent, I did everything that I could to look for these programs, and a lot of them are free, to tell you the truth. But they have wonderful programs. One summer year, we did a architect, I think it was like a week long in Hampton University. They have multiple STEM programs. And then they also have college tours, college campuses. They have a host of great programming, knowledge, and mentoring for young kids, young adults. I wish I had that growing up.
I think it was, informative, and really got me thinking about the oysters in the Chesapeake Bay. I learned that too many are getting picked up and used at a very alarming rate, and there's a lot of laws to reduce that.
All right, guys, so today we're going to go through a quick demonstration of how oyster harvesting techniques have changed over time and how those evolving technologies have impacted oyster reefs and the greater population. So we've got our white beans representing live oysters and our black beans representing dead oysters. I've mounted them up as best as possible so that they represent a reef structure, because oyster reefs are 3D structures in the water. And we're going to go through different harvesting methods and how they evolved over time. So the first big method that we're going to talk about is Hantons, which they're still actually used today, but it's this two-handled tool where it's these long wooden poles with baskets on the end. And how you use them is someone actually stands on the edge of a boat, so it's a little bit precarious, and reaches down into the water with their hand tongs and picks up a little clump of oysters and swings them up onto the boat. We don't have hand tongs, and that wouldn't make sense for our little oyster reef here, but we're going to replicate that to the best of our abilities using 2 kitchen forks. And to really get that motion, we're going to flip them around backwards so that we can represent our hand tongs. Now, when we go in, you'll see we don't pick up that many oysters, whoops, and they kind of go everywhere. But that's okay, that's what it probably looks like underwater. And we're going to do our best to get as many oysters as we can. And you'll see as I do that the oyster reef is kind of flattening out a little bit. Now there's some holes in it. So even though we haven't collected that many oysters, actually see here, not that many in there, we've already created some kind of damage or destruction to the reef. And we've got some little bald spots forming here. So we move on to our next oyster technology. I'm going to go ahead and build this back up so that we're starting with a similar reef each time. And if we jump ahead in history a little bit, the next big tool that was used was a dredge, which is kind of like a metal basket that you would drop off the side of a boat, drag along the bottom of the bay, and then bring that basket back up to the boat and dump the oysters out. So it can catch a lot more oysters than hand tongs. The first kind of vessel that technology was used on was called a skipjack, which is just a fancy name for a very particular type of sailing vessel. So these boats were powered by the wind, didn't have a ton of steering, like very specific steering ability, but could certainly generate enough power to pull a dredge along the bottom. For that, we're going to represent a dredge with our spoon. So this is just a regular kitchen spoon, and we're just going to drag it along to pick up oysters, like it would be dragging along the seafloor. You'll see I can get way more oysters with a skipjack dredge than with my hand tongs. And also that I'm really moving the pile around as I drag along the bottom. And we're getting this totally different shaped reef because that 3D structure is changing as the dredge is pulling across. So you can see a lot more destruction and damage caused with the skipjack dredge than our hand tongs. And we're going to go through just one more tool here. I'm going to build that reef back up. Now the dredge stayed in use for through kind of multiple successions of different vessel types. So after sailing vessels kind of fell out of favor, we had power boats with engines in them. So we can generate a lot more power. We can kind of go wherever we want to in the bay instead of having to rely on the wind. And so even though they're still using really similar dredges, we're going to use a bigger scoop. In this case, I'm using a 1/4 measuring cup to represent a power dredge and just that extra power that you get when you have an engine on the boat. As you'll see with this one, we caused some serious reef destruction as we're trying to get those oysters up off the bottom. You'll see we've totally flattened out the reef. We've scattered oysters everywhere. We've collected quite a few. You see, as technology increased with adding those engines, even though the dredge stayed the same, we can collect more oysters in a shorter amount of time, but also that method then produces more scattering of the oysters and really breaks up that 3D structure. And so even though as harvesting methods have improved, we've been able to harvest more oysters, they're also causing more damage to the reefs and a bigger impact. And because oysters are really great at filtering water and taking food from up in the water and transmitting it down to the sea floor for other organisms to feed on, and protecting our shorelines, this has had a huge impact on the bay. And has really created a need for stronger regulations so that we manage how many oysters are coming out of the water and make sure that there are enough left in the water that we can maintain the function of oysters in the bay, that we still have enough that they can do those really amazing things that we rely on. And also why aquaculture has become so prominent, so that we can grow oysters and still have the jobs for watermen who make their living from oysters, and also people who love to eat oysters, but we don't have to take as many from the wild population, and we can give them a chance to rebound. With that, thank you for tuning in to our lesson today. We're really excited you were able to join us.